Hello, good evening. We are back from our Christmas and winter break. So now on the 17th of January, we are back with our live show with our SAP IP Business Talk. I'm very happy that you joined us. This is a live event on LinkedIn. So the logic is that you should write us your comments, your questions, please, in the chat, and I will pick that up during the next 45 minutes to discuss that with our expert today. Stefan will introduce himself. He's a patent attorney. And our topic today is this very specific challenge of software patents in different jurisdictions and how to deal with that. Stefan, thank you very much for joining us today and for being our expert to this very specific topic. My first question to you, like to all the other experts which showing up here in our show, is how did you come into this field of IP? Why you became a patent attorney, and what you're doing today in your day-to-day business?
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for introduction. The short answer is by accident, but don't want to waste too much time on that. But therefore, a short summary: I studied physics in Vienna, and then I got a nice job offer at Infineon in Munich. So I moved to Munich without knowing that this is the capital of IP in Europe, which I found out far later. I worked there for some years, but then thought for myself that wouldn't be the right to do it forever, working in such a large company. And so I tried to figure out what you can do as a physicist beside being developer in a large company like Infineon. And at that time, I saw a job in the Süddeutsche Zeitung. At that time, still job advertisement was done in newspapers. And I thought, okay, what's a patent attorney? I researched a bit, and then I went to two law firms and found it very fascinating to deal with every day with new inventions, innovation, and tried, give it a try. Let's do it. Applied and got the job in one of these law firms. And 15 years later, I'm still in the business, so I'm still fascinated about IP and the special the patents. I think the most fascinating point on that is that you still every few days have something new on your table, and per definition, you don't know it before. You have never seen that before. Otherwise, it's not an invention. So most of the time, definitely it's new, and you learn every day, and that's still the challenge every day in this business. So that's one of the aspects, and the other one is when I finished my patent attorney training. Several of my colleagues were also at the same stage, and we then founded 2SBL at that time, directly after finishing our trainee program. So being very new to the branch, dealing with all the aspects of running also their own law firm. That was a very challenging time, and that was more than 10 years ago now, and we are still here, still the partners are there, so it's running quite well. And why is it that we are talking today about this multi-jurisdictional approach, and especially in the field of software? That's one of the reasons, of course, is that we are representing a lot of international large companies in the area of electrical engineering software, and large ones in the US and some in Japan and so on. They always, and that's one of the points, they don't deal with only one jurisdiction, but with several jurisdictions. And therefore, here we are today discussing this topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I mean that's quite normal, isn't it? That it is that people come on occasion, so to speak, in this area and are to a certain extent fascinated from what it is, and then staying in that business and finding their role in it. I mean, yeah, as a physicist with a background in Finian, I guess. Your specialization to software patents is quite clear, and I have learned a lot from you about these very specific topics, software patents, and especially also this multi-jurisdictional aspect. So let's jump directly into that field. So why do you think it is important to consider the requirements of these different jurisdictions when it comes to patent application? What is your position on that?
Yeah, as everybody knows, their own jurisdiction is by far the nearest for everybody. So every patent attorney knows its own jurisdiction very well. But the problem is, as already mentioned, clients are not interested usually in only one jurisdiction, but in several jurisdictions. And in the field we are working on, like software, electrical engineering, and so on, it's almost always the US, followed by Europe, China, and then sometimes also Korea, Japan. So the IP5 are the most relevant jurisdictions, definitely. And for today's talk, and also when I give examples, always I pick the US jurisdiction and the European jurisdictions because, in my view, they are the most different jurisdictions you can find, and they are the most differences and the most things you need to consider when speaking of these two jurisdictions. And often when I talk to our US clients, they ask me, Stefan, so we have quite good grant rates in the US, we have nice scope of protection, but when we compare that to Europe, there's significantly lower grant rates and the scope is most of the time more narrow. What's the reason for that? And so obviously you can't easily answer that question with just two sentences. There are many aspects playing a role in to that specific question. One of that is, of course, that not everything which is patentable in the US is patentable in Europe. That's one thing, but there's nothing we can do about that. But there are different requirements in the US and in Europe to get protection. And that's something we can do something about it. We can consider already at the drafting stage the requirements of more than your own jurisdiction. And that's the very important point, and also something, or the main point in our talk, although the rest will then more focus also on software and why they are important. But in general, it's important, independent from the technical field you are working in, to consider all the jurisdictions which are relevant for your client, to provide from an international point of view an optimized scope of protection and grant rate when you look on all jurisdiction overall. And maybe when we stay at the example of US and Europe, for example, if you have US drafted application prosecuting that in Europe, one of the typical problems is when you amend claims that you need literal disclosure for all the features you add, and you have often clarity objections to one of the features in the claims. And if you don't have sufficient definitions or alternative wording, intermediate levels of generalization, then you often have a problem to even only to reply on clarity objections. So from time to time, it happens that application get rejected just because there's a clarity objection. It would be so easy to get rid of that objection if you have any definition in the specification for a term. But without that, without literal disclosure, it's nearly impossible then to react on that. And if you look into the software in the AI region, it gets more specific. So for software, all the approaches about having a technical problem, a technical solution, a technical character of the invention, having arguments for that, all that approach. And when it comes to AI, it gets even more specific in disclosing enough information about the training algorithm if you go for an application of a known AI algorithm and all that kind of stuff. So that things which are very European specific, which need to be considered by the US drafting attorney if you want to increase your grant rates in Europe or getting a better scope of protection in Europe.
And you think, excuse me, the first thing that puzzles me is that so that we have a significant low granting rate from US patent applicants here in Europe? And is that one of the reasons? What is your experience on that?
You see that in some technical fields that the grant rates are on average lower. And also if you compare the scope of protection, it's often so that it's more narrow in Europe. One reason for that is clarity objections, essential feature objections, which you don't have in the US. So independent from novelty and inventiveness, you also already need to narrow down your claim to get rid of this clarity and essential feature objections. And therefore, I would say on average, you find more narrow claim in Europe than in the US.
Okay, so what you're saying is, when I understand you right, we have this challenge that due to these regulations about clarity and due to a lack of, let's say, professionalism to use or to apply to this kind of regulation from the US attorneys, we see a not necessary limitation of claims simply because of this behavior, which is not necessary, right?
Yeah, and even sometimes you can't get a patent at all, only due to that reason. You never come to the discussion of novelty and inventiveness because you already stop at that point because you can't get rid of that objection. And if you would consider that during drafting, like having more definitions, having alternative wording, and so on, then it would be more easy to address these issues at the EPO.
Yeah, got you. So, which means that is simply, this is a technical aspect which has to be taken into account and in a kind of, let's say, filing strategy. So, when you start to think about this jurisdiction, so for example, from the US to Europe, you should take that into account, that this is a different approach, a different framework which we have to take into account and to apply to that. And when I understand you right, this is your first critics, but also your first support and your service, that you say this has to be done in the right way, simply to make it more likely to come to the discussion of granting and to have a more likely a granting for the application.
Definitely, yeah. But it's also the other way around. So if you have European drafted applications, then you struggle with some different problems when you go with them to the US. Let's take, just for an example, means plus function wording. From the European point of view, with means plus function wording, you might get the broadest scope of protection possible for something. But in the US, with only having means plus function, that could be considered very narrow, depending on what you disclosed in the specification. And even it can get rejected at all or invalidated if you don't have the right disclosure in the specification. If you go for single means claims at the end, it might be invalidated only due to that reason. And if I'm drafting in Europe and I don't consider such aspects, if my client is also interested in the US, then it's the same the other way around. And then if you look into the software area, for example, if you don't know about Alice and if you never heard of the MPAPs, the guidelines for the examiners, and for example, that there are examples for patentable subject matter in there which give guidance for the examiners what could be patentable and in which way the claims can be written, then it's the other way around. So they struggle with our applications because nobody did consider the requirements of the US system.
Okay.
And therefore,
So,
it's so important that you know which jurisdictions are important for your client and consider also the other jurisdictions for your drafting.
okay, and your experience is that the companies, don't really take that into account and simply assume that the way how it is done for one jurisdiction would fit. So in terms of one fits it all, would also fit because it is obviously an invention and is something new and inventive. And so where should be the problem? And don't optimize the application to the designated jurisdiction.
Yeah, most or many clients don't take that much care. I think one good thing, and what we see also from some clients, is that they actively bring together their outside counsels from time to time to exchange their experience, to get this feedback. So showing which problems do you face with the application drafted in, let's say, the US, and the other way around. They tell me what are their problems facing with my applications. So this exchange is from some clients actively requested, or they even schedule meetings for the outside counsels to exchange that ideas and also learn themselves from that exchange. And that always helps a lot, because often the problems are very specific also to the clients. I mean, some are generic and everybody faces the same problems, but some of them are related to the technology they are dealing with. And so this exchange is really helpful with improving grant rates and scope of protection in an international
but that means that at these companies there is a certain awareness that this is a challenge and it is not just a mistake from the outside attorneys, but it is really improving the overall knowledge to coordinate that and to organize that, and for improving the overall result at the end for the company.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I heard that from Philips, from a presentation which were given, that Philips is quite active in that in terms of improving quality standards. And what you say is also that that multinational companies are taking care about that. Is that also at mid-sized companies? I would assume that the smaller the companies become, that the awareness of that problem is lower.
Yeah, it is, unfortunately. But of course, they don't have, one thing is the knowledge. Second is the capacity. And they usually trust or interact only with their national attorney, and they believe what this attorney tells them. So it's difficult for them to see the different approaches and how it could be in other jurisdictions, because they don't have that huge portfolio. They have not that many law firms they're working with. They have no comparison. They have not that in-house knowledge. It's definitely far more difficult for them to see whether or what they get for other jurisdictions.
Yeah, got you. I mean, they see the result, and it's extremely hard to make an evaluation. I mean, a colleague from you, with whom we work for a long time, Bastian Best, Bastian is giving these examples from time to time, and on LinkedIn, and then writing what could be better, what could be done better on that. And I mean, that is extremely helpful to see on a concrete example what you should not do and how you could improve it. Simply, even when it is not a teaching for patent attorneys here, it is just for improving the overall awareness that not just because you received a patent and not just because it is granted, it is a good one. Okay, and also Martin Schweiger from Singapore discussed that. So these quality of a patent has a lot to do in terms of what you say is there is an abstract objective, what the patent could have been, and at the end what we really received, and there is a difference, and typically this is not clear for the applicant that this difference is not necessary, so it is simply a chance which was not used. I mean, that's the point here, and I think that is a very important discussion. So thank you very much for giving your expertise here. And we also discussed already about a certain series of posts which you would like to do on the IP Business Academy. I'm very happy about that, to make such examples and to improve this awareness that there is a certain quality level which could have been reached and is not reached because of these very practical results.
Yeah, that's definitely something which you see from time to time, sometimes really often, that there could be a very easy solution if it would have been considered already at the time of drafting to get rid of problems. Not only that you can't get a patent at all, but also significantly improve the scope of protection. And therefore, I started also to write up these examples on focusing on different aspects, showing it on real cases, and giving ideas for a solution approach, how you can already get rid of this problem when you consider that one during drafting.
Wonderful. Yeah, and also I think these mentoring for our students. So we have master students, diploma students, and I also recommend to talk with you to improve their knowledge, to understand better how to work with different jurisdictions. I think that is very, very impressive what you're doing here, and also helping colleagues to improve there. The idea, what we wanted to talk about is especially the digital software or software patents, computer implemented inventions, digital patents, whatever. So we have these very specific field, and this specific field has also specific characteristics. And one aspect is that we have typically a combination. So in a solution, we have a combination of, let's say, hardware, software, a certain level of service which is integrated, and in addition, that can come from different companies. So in theory, we call it complementary assets, which have to come together to create a solution. And at the end, when it comes then to infringement, the question is, who is infringing? Where is the infringement? So there is this phenomenon of divided infringement. And so I personally have the experience that patent attorneys, there are patent attorneys out there who do not really take into account the concrete infringement situation. So they describe an invention, very correct, no question about that. But from a forbidding right perspective, I mean, at the end, what is a patent? A patent is a forbidding right, and this comes into play when we talk about infringement, and when the patent attorney do not take into account the infringement or enforcement situation, then what is the value of this patent? I mean, yes, there are some motivations to file patents which has nothing to do with infringement or enforcement, but obviously the best case is that during the drafting, the logic of infringement and enforcement is taken into account. So what can we do with this, or how can we manage, how can we tackle this problem of divided infringement?
Yeah, that's definitely a good and important question, because what I really often see is system claims. And there you have, let's take an example I saw recently. There was a mobile device. This one sends data to a base station. The base station did send it to the cloud. There was something computed. Then it was sent back to the base station and back to the phone, and the phone did something. So in this scenario, so you have so many components which contribute to this claim. So it's the phone, it's the software on the phone, it's the base station, it's the cloud computing entity, it's the software there. And all these different components come often from different providers, different companies. And in such a scenario, it's really important that the attorney figures out where is really the inventive step, the inventive idea executed. Like, is it on the phone, is it in the cloud, or is it really an interaction between these two? So in this example, there was one part of the innovation was sending a specific information, receiving a parameter back, and doing something with the parameter. And the other aspect was calculating this parameter somewhere in the cloud. So having this in a system claim is not the best approach for that. It would be far better if you focus one independent claim of the software to the software running on the mobile device, which sends some parameter, receives some parameter, doing something with the parameter. And on the other hand, one independent claim on the software running somewhere in the cloud, receiving some information from a phone or a mobile device, and calculating some parameter, sending the parameter.
Okay.
Of course, there might be in some jurisdiction issues with that software on the cloud server because it only receives information, calculates something, sending something with being an abstract idea or a mathematical method, which you need to be aware, which you need to take measures, so have good dependent claims, have specification addressing this issue. But from the very first approach for trying to get the best scope of protection, start with only claims to the single entity, independent claims to the single entity. Of course, later on during prosecution in some jurisdiction, you might narrow it down and you might go for the system if they interact in a specific way. But for the beginning and claiming and drafting the application for multi-jurisdictions, try to go for the single entities. Of course, you can add a system claim as well, and I highly encourage everybody also to add a system claim, but not only a system claim, and especially not claiming the base station in this scenario. There's nothing new on the base station. It doesn't matter whether it's going the data through the base station or through Wi-Fi or wherever. Yeah, and therefore, the thing with software undivided infringement is some smart litigators might argue, no problem, we can argue that we have solution for divided infringement in our jurisdiction, definitely no problem. But they need to argue. And my point is, as soon as you need to argue, there might be better arguments from the other party. And if we have the possibility to address this issue already during drafting, then we should go for it.
Yeah, got you. I mean, so I see the challenge here, especially that sometimes partner attorneys have the tendency to, let's say, to describe what they see. So especially when they come from some, let's say, classical technological areas like machinery. So then it is, I see something, a solution, and because what I see is the solution, I describe that. Okay, and I think these abstract area of software patents is really tricky. Especially when we have a big difference between what I see or I don't see anything because I cannot see the solution, and which means first of all I have to describe what is it, the ontology, the to be, what is it, and then I go back and say, okay, but when it comes to so what is the invention per se, and what happens when somebody wants to enforce that? and this enforcement is quite tricky. So what is your recommendation? How should we which kind of perspective should we have on these software-oriented digital development? So what is the best way to describe as an applicant, as an inventor, as an applicant, as a company representative? What is the best way to describe it, give it to a patent attorney to support the work in the ideal way for the patent attorney to get the best result in this kind of cooperation?
I think one important thing is definitely that it is explained which method step is done by which entity. Often that's not that clear. It could be some different entities, of course, also. It could be on a local device, it could be in the cloud and so on. But it's important, and often it's not written in the invention disclosure, and the inventor doesn't care about because he thinks, okay, that's not important. But that's the task of the patent attorney. When discussing the invention with the inventor, it's definitely important that you figure out which are the important steps for the invention, getting rid of the rest, which are not necessary to differentiate from the state of the art, and where are these steps performed? Is it local? Is it in the cloud? Which kind of data is transmitted? Where maybe some steps are done locally, some in the cloud. It's very important to figure out together with the inventor all these details. And then afterwards, always when I'm drafting a patent application is one point, who would be the infringer? Who do I want to go for? Do I cover that infringer? And the other thing is, for every feature, is it necessary to differentiate from the state of the art or not? So in my view, a good claim has never more than 15 to 20 lines. If I see a claim that is a page long, there's definitely 50% of the features you can get rid of. Yeah. So starting, bring it to the point, only address the very specific inventive features, and that can be in 95% of the cases done with less than 15 lines.
Okay, and in addition, and I think that is also my experience when I work with companies, that they are so focused on what they invented that they forget to, let's say, simulate, to think about the infringement. And I like pretty much what you say in terms of who might be the infringer and how this infringement might happen. That is, I think, when we design a forbidding right, that is the absolutely crucial point, and it helps also to design really the invention, to understand what is really invented here when I try to understand who would infringe it and in which way the infringer would act. I think that is very important. I would like to, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, maybe add just one more point here. It's not topic today, but definitely with software, detectability is a very important point. What can I really detect and prove that there is an infringement? Because I don't have the source code of the competitor. And that makes it often very difficult to go for or see whether there is an infringement or not. So also when you claim an idea, an invention, think about detectability. How would I detect that a competitor will infringe a patent? And there are often several ways to define the scope of protection. And if you have the possibility to define it more with terms of like which kind of information is input and which is output, which is usually better detectable than what is going on in the black box in the software itself, then go for that approach. so detectability is also one important thing for getting good scope of detection. But it's not part of our talk today.
No, but I can't agree more that this is really something which is important. So it is sometimes it leads to a, let's say, different perspective on the invention when we talk about the question, how could I detect an infringement? And that is an important discussion when we come from a forbidding right perspective. I mean, and that leads me to another question. This, what can you see from outside? Yeah, so digital solutions are quite often user-centric, so it is something what a user can see, how a user can interact with a system in a different way, and so which means the use case scenario in which the invention is acting depends on users, which means we have a human being inside of the invention or as a part of it, and that is obviously a problem in terms of technicality, which means what is your experience and your recommendation? How can we deal with that fact, with this user involvement in use cases when it comes to software patents and digital solutions, to get patent granted and grants, and to avoid these even to mention these user perspective?
So I think that you can say there are maybe three different scenarios. So one is the user input something to the software do something with that. Then we have the scenario where the software do something and output something to the user. And then you have user interaction in between. So you do something, the software does something, then the user does something, and then the software does something. And there might be some different approaches for these different cases. So the first one might be easy to address, I think. So, but you see it still from time to time that you have in a method claim or so defining something, entering input data by user. So this claim will never be directly infringed by the software because the software doesn't input the input data. It's the user. Again, smart litigators maybe would say, no problem, we can argue that, but we try to avoid that. And that would be easy, of course, because just try to sit in the software and look at it, what the software is doing. The software is not inputting the data, the software is receiving the data. And instead just entering input data by the user, it's just receiving input data from the user. That's what the software is doing. So sometimes it's really easy to circumvent such problems which you cause if you don't think about it, if you just think, okay, the user enters some input data. So that would be the scenario when the user interacts with the software and inputs something. With the output, it gets a little more complex because if the software just calculates something and outputs that information to the user, it's often the discussion, is there a technical effect? What do I do with this information which is calculated by the software? Is there anything done at all besides just showing it to the user? A typical example might be if you have a new algorithm for improving your routing on your navigation system. If you just display it for the user on your navigation system in the car, and the driver just uses that information to drive the car, it might be difficult to get that one granted because it's only showing information. On the other hand, if the very same algorithm is and the information output that there is used to autonomously drive the car, then it's easier. Of course, that's jurisdiction specific again, but you see these differences. Do I output something to the user? Do I output something which I use afterwards for automatically doing something? And at least the important thing here is if you have such scenarios, disclose both applications. Try to go for the broad approach with your claim, but have in mind that there could be problems with that claim without using the data afterwards for doing something. Have dependent claims, have enough information alternative examples in the specification where also this information is used to do something automatically. And at least the worst thing which you can get is the application where you autonomous drive the car. But maybe you only also get in some jurisdiction the broad approach where it's independent from what you do with that information later on.
Yeah.
And then the third case is user action in between. So you have a kind of missing link. Maybe you calculate something, a pre-selection, the user selects something, and then something is done with that information. So also here, you try if there is a scenario where there's an automatic information interaction between these two entities. So without the user, the second component just automatically select something based on some parameters, then disclose that as well. Just to have this variety of options later on to define your claims in a more narrow way, maybe.
Yeah, so depending simply on how the examiner is reacting on what you are suggesting, right?
Or the jurisdiction, what are the requirements of the jurisdiction, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so your recommendation is that these user interaction should be seen out of the system in that case, so from the software, and that it is something what the software receives, what the software is giving, and obviously the perfect case is when we have something automatic and to the physical world. And so yeah, switching on the washing machine and not recommending to switch on the washing machine. I mean, that's the big difference. Okay. Yeah, finally, we have not that much time left. One user asked the question whether this show is recorded. Yes, every LinkedIn live show from us is recorded and will be available. And we make also a blog post on the IP Business Academy with a summary. So you will be able to give that to your colleagues as you would like to have it, obviously. A final question, and please try to focus it quite short because we have only 3 minutes left. It's a lot of discussion is about AI at the moment. I mean, it's the trend, the buzzword. And it's about training data. And here we talk about patents, so not about copyrights and other aspects of training data. So here it is about that in the training data can lie the invention per se of the AI. So it's not the model itself, it's the training data. And so how can we deal with this training data? Because typically the question is, do we really explain the full technical learning here or teaching, and is it really given to the public or not? So what is your recommendation how to deal with training data in AI solution, in patentable AI solutions?
Yeah, so software is already very specific. When it comes to AI, it's even more specific. So here it's even more important to consider all the different jurisdictions because their requirements are quite different between the two. And maybe there was also a very good book recently published a few months ago, AI in patents. So if you have a look into that, it's a really good comparison of the different requirements of, I think, 16 different jurisdictions. So that's really good. But when it comes to the training data and these approaches, of course, at the European Patent Office especially, you have to disclose a lot of how the training is done, which kind of data is done, how much of data, which specific data structure, kind of which format is used and how it is generated. So a lot of details if you go for the training algorithm. But maybe one point I want to make at last for the AI topic is don't mix training and application. That's something I see quite often in AI-related application, that you have a claim which relates to the application of the claim, but having method steps of the training. So it's a mixture of the application of the trained AI algorithm and the training. But the trained AI algorithm, you don't see how it was trained or with which data it was trained. Then you need to figure out whether your invention relates to the training or does it relate to the application. And if there's both an aspect of invention, then have two independent claims. But please don't mix it.
Okay, so that are the famous final words for today. Adriana has also a question about combining different protection mechanisms. So we are available in the after show party on LinkedIn. So Stefan will also answer to your questions and also recommend the book, which you mentioned, everything on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stefan, for taking the time to give you your insights. We are very happy to have you as expert at the IP Business Academy. We will be back in 2 weeks, and I'm happy to see you then. Same time, same place. Stay safe, especially in the south of Germany. At the morning, at this day, we have lots of ice out there on the streets, and be careful when you are driving. So thank you very much. Bye bye, Stefan. Have a good time.
Bye.